Welcome to the Movie Business Podcast, picking up where Movie Business Book left off. I'm Jason Squire, hosting a wide range of industry talent and executives to answer fundamental questions about the business today. Here we go. Today we're doing our annual year-end review and predictions. The Crystal Ball episode, a look at 2024 with ILAN HAIMOFF, partner and profit participation services practice leader at accounting firm GHJ. His specialty includes forensic accounting on behalf of talent, investors, co-producers, distributors, with over 25 years serving clients in entertainment and financial services. ILAN has overseen over 100 audits. He has studied the evolving business from a unique vantage point, which is why it's great to have him return for this episode. Welcome back, ILAN.
Thank you, Jason. I really appreciate including me. And I know that this particular podcast you and I have done together, I think maybe 6 times.
I think that's right,
including today. But it's a pleasure doing it. I'm always having fun doing it with you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And we're back for more. So in general, one of the mantras for 2024, I think will be everyone is cutting back. We're going to cover 6 topics together: management, talent, production, distribution, exhibition, streaming, and other media. So let's turn to management. First comes to mind has to do with the way management handled the strikes in our industry. They handled it rather poorly, initially with disdain for talent, causing creatives to dig in their heels properly. Early on, the talks stalled, and it went weeks without management coming back to the bargaining table, assuming that, the cynical assumption that the growing hardship of no income for talent and small support businesses would erode solidarity, in effect, let them suffer. But they were wrong. Then, Robert Iger of Disney made comments at the Allen & Company's Sun Valley, Idaho conference, indicating that the strikes were inconvenient, resulting in criticism. And then they brought in a DC PR firm for crisis management, and the message softened. It should never have gone on this long, 6 months. ILAN?
Yeah, so let's talk about as opposed to looking at the process of the strikes, but rather what do we do today and what are the studios doing today? If you visit a studio today, there is now a big rush to either complete production, get ready to start production. It is quite busy at the moment trying to catch up for the time that was lost. Mm-hmm. So that is what we see right now. I think that, and maybe we'll talk more about that later on, is because of that rush to get the production going once again, there may be additional cost involved, which leads me to the bigger picture for management. The biggest challenge for the management of media and studio companies right now continues to be cash flow management, increased competition, and ever increasing cost of doing business. And the question that comes up as we look at 2024 is, will there be further costs beyond the cost that we've seen in 2022 and 2023? And the bigger question, perhaps, is, will management steer toward at least conversation, not necessarily that it will actually happen, but conversations about further consolidation?
Very good. So it brings up the question, have the two sides learned anything from the strikes? Talent learned to stay strong, even as rank and file got seriously hurt in the pocketbook, rent, food, tuition, etc. Management learned to be, I think, more respectful of their talent. Because remember, this was the first double strike in the history of the business, 60 years, WGA and SAG-AFTRA. And the actors achieved nearly everything they held out for: higher minimums, defining AI, and a new formula for streaming residuals. I also want to cover something unrelated, but it is a management issue having to do with cutting costs at, for example, Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers took a $30 million tax write-off for shelving the animated feature that was finished, Coyote versus Acme. Now, this is a movie I want to see because I'm an old Roadrunner fan from way back. And for the sake of their bookkeeping, they're shelving it. However, they do say they may sell it to a streamer, and we'll see. And this is after Warner Brothers shelves Batgirl in 2022. So these are tough decisions.
Yes, indeed. I certainly do not envy management having to make decisions about what they want to prioritize, what projects will continue, what projects will end. What do you do in terms of your current staffing and organization, and do you need to make changes? And I think that we are going through a period of change. I don't know how long that process will go through, moving from linear distribution to more digital distribution, and that will take time. And many of these companies are going to have to adapt and change. And unfortunately, it's going to be painful. Things are just simply going to require decision making. Some of those may not be popular.
Exactly. Well, there certainly is an era of transition for the entire entertainment industry. Let's turn to talent. So the major guilds heroically toughed out a long, difficult siege, ultimately achieving their basic goals and positioning them well for the next negotiation, not in 3 years, but in 2.5 years, right? Because the strike was almost half a year. For actors, how will the new formula for streaming residuals play out? That's a question for the future. Will it be policed by SAG-AFTRA, some committee meeting once a month with management? This will evolve, so we'll see what happens. Ilan?
Yeah, no, I think that it is going to be a challenging year as we look at 2024. And there's a couple of factors playing into this. Number one, even though, as I mentioned before, projects are ramping up once again, it's going to take a little bit of time to get things in order and coordinate schedules and getting the talent back in production. So you may be looking at maybe an additional month or 2 or maybe 3 of continued financial challenge for the talent who has not been paid for the majority of 2023. But I think the point is it's going to continue a little bit longer. And then the second question is, will there be more or less work as we move into 2024? And at the moment, it appears that there may be less projects available as opposed to more. And so not only are you going to take a little bit of time to ramp up once again and get the talent working for a little more money, by the way, as you mentioned, the second question is, how many projects are going to be kicking off in 2024 and available for them to compete to be working as part of the team, the production team?
Exactly. So these issues are consistent with the mantra overall, everyone is cutting back. Linear TV programming, cable programming, streaming, theatrical, everyone. This targets talent, but also trickles down to support people like agents, managers, small businesses, caterers, transportation, and the like. It is a restructuring, to be sure, after a very tough 1-2 punch in the industry of COVID and then the strikes. So this brings us to production. The strikes caused work stoppages, yes, throwing the release calendars in disarray. However, from the management side, technically, this did save production and marketing costs. Ilan?
Yeah, during the COVID period, we've seen, obviously, increased production costs for health and safety reasons, but now we're also seeing the impact of inflation. So between all of that, between all of these various different factors, production is becoming a lot more expensive, coupled with, and we've talked about this, the financial pressures on the studios, which are leading to perhaps less production. And so as we look at 2024, the bigger question is, are we going to see less production, but those that are going to be produced with higher quality and higher likelihood of success? So maybe less number of productions, but more high quality, perhaps bigger productions that will be coming through the pipeline. So I think the highlight here is production is becoming more expensive. There's less money available to spend, and therefore it's going to be probably more scrutiny as to what is going to be made. and for how much? And then all of that is going to be driven by probably a lot more thought and research as to ultimately which will be successful. Again, a lot of this still is a gamble, but there's going to be a lot more scrutiny. I think that's the key, and less production in 2024 from what we see.
That sounds right. Tighter controls at the different levels proportional of different projects. Now, this brings us to distribution. During the summer, there were some serious stumbles at the box office. Franchises like Indiana Jones and Mission Impossible did not meet, sure, they grossed a lot of money, but they did not meet the studio projections considering their costs in both production and marketing. On the other hand, original titles, and this is very healthy for the business, original titles, Oppenheimer and Barbie, grossed through the roof. It was so wonderful to track all of this. Very good news creatively and for the audience who turned out in droves. Totally different audiences, very healthy for the business, with Barbie ultimately becoming Warner Brothers' all-time biggest hit, grossing $1.4 billion worldwide. Also, in terms of distribution, because of the strikes, some holiday releases were pushed into 2024, and this is another issue. Ilan?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about distribution beyond, and if you're talking about film, beyond the initial theatrical distribution. And I think that what we're already seeing from a couple of different key players in the industry, content is probably going to go elsewhere outside your exclusive box. And what I mean by that is if you're going to see content from HBO appearing on Netflix, and I think it's already going on, you may see Paramount exclusive content perhaps moving somewhere else, and so on and so forth. So I think that content will likely break into new media and even competitors' platforms that you may historically not see any interest in doing so. There's that sense of moving away from exclusivity to non-exclusive distribution. And I think really for the bottom line impact, you're making a lot more money. And licensing is a fairly profitable approach to making more money. You know, you may see moving away from just putting it on your own platforms, whether it's streaming or ad-based, to new frontiers like the fast channels, perhaps a lot more sales to traditional cable and free, which I know we'll talk a little bit more later on. And really the big question is 2024 going to be the year that content gets everywhere?
Yeah, I think that's true. That's where we're heading. It's also interesting that it's almost like a sine curve in the business, that when streaming started, Netflix was licensing a lot of stuff, paying billions of dollars to studios for valuable content. This is before studios ramped up to be competitors with Netflix. And slowly, when these original Netflix deals ended, the big streamers came in and, again, contributed billions of dollars to their own streaming services in putting their own IP on their platforms, but also billions of dollars in new original content per year. And now there's a sort of turning back, as you say, a move from exclusivity to non-exclusive, because the guidepost is to make more money. That really sounds right.
For sure, yes.
So let's turn to exhibition. And I find this especially exciting this year because there's some new players and new business models. Let's take a deep bow to Taylor Swift, great artist, for the business model and historic success of Taylor Swift The Eras Tour. Instead of going to a major distributor, she made a deal with AMC Theaters to distribute this nearly 3-hour concert movie. And her huge social media following generated the largest movie pre-sales in history. Also, the deal mandated that theaters not show the movie Monday through Wednesday each week. It was really a long weekend kind of experience. So according to Brooks Barnes of the New York Times, Swift financed and produced the movie and gets 57% of ticket sales. Well, that's a huge amount compared to artists in a standard distribution model that's studio-based. The tickets cost $19.89, Taylor Swift's birth year, with children and those over 60 paying $13.13, her favorite number. Add to that the synergy of sports and concerts with the romance between Travis Kelce of Kansas City Chiefs and Taylor Swift. It was an enormous success, and really one more beat about this great entrepreneurial artist, Taylor Swift. In 2019, her record company sold the rights to her 6 albums to a manager she didn't like. So since then, she has re-recorded so far, I think 3 albums, maybe 4, and each became Taylor's version of the original, selling even more copies than the originals, reducing the value of the originals. What a wonderful business decision this was to protect her IP. Her current deal is with a Universal Music Group. And of course, the Taylor Swift concert movies followed a couple of months later by the one that's in theaters now, Renaissance, a film by Beyoncé, which opened with a strong 21 million domestic opening. The artist financed, wrote, and co-directed the movie. So this is power, financing your own movie. It's another example of the terrific crossover potential of the music and theatrical worlds. Ilan?
No, you touched in an area that is quite creative and quite fascinating, actually, to see how it develops into the future. But I think it takes me back to the bigger picture, and the bigger question on my mind is, with COVID generally behind us and the strike generally behind us now, and this is the biggest question, will 2024, from a theatrical exhibition standpoint, here in the United States and across the world, will bring 2019 once again? That is the big question. I think that we may be getting close to 2019 numbers because there is going to be, as you said, the squeezing of films out to be distributed in 2024, plus much more in the pipeline for 2024, and less disruption as we look at the next year. So I am optimistic that we are headed in the direction of bringing back those numbers prior to COVID, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I want to share your optimism. This is so unknowable because we haven't seen a lot of the movies, but certainly that's the industry's intention. Now that the coast is clear, now that people are back to work and production gearing up again, all very good news for the industry's pipeline to generate popular movies. And that, of course, is the most difficult thing to chart. But I'm with you. It's, the glass is half full.
Sure, yeah.
Now, let's turn to streaming. My favorite fun fact, streaming is the most used TV viewing system, period. The introduction of ad-supported streaming subscriptions has proven very successful, boosting subscriber numbers. But according to the New York Times, Peacock, Disney, and Paramount Plus are losing money. Peacock, Disney Plus, and Paramount Plus, losing money. Hulu and Netflix are profitable, and Max will hopefully soon be profitable. Now, here's the issue that Wall Street is putting continuous pressure on streamers who are cutting back after extreme expenditures. And this puts this arena into a kind of difficult position to continue to retain subscribers while also being bold in terms of the projects that they greenlight. Ilan?
Yeah, I know. Streaming is certainly the topic of the day. Everybody talks about streaming all the time. I think that as I look at 2024, the question that comes to mind is, will advertising-supported VOD become the new way, and the growing, by the way, segment of streaming as we look at the coming year and beyond? Because, and if you look at the underlying financial matrices when it comes to ad-based video on demand, it is more profitable. I mean, you really are making more money. And I think that the point that you brought up, that there is financial pressure, may drive much of the future growth to be headed in the direction of some form of an ad-based VOD. Exactly how that all works out, we'll have to wait and see. The only other alternative is to see consolidation of these streaming services. It's just not, in order for it to be sustainable, it's simply not sustainable the way it is now. But in order for it to be more sustainable into the future, and by the way, including Netflix, which is looking at ad-based video on demand being more profitable for them, that this may be the way of the future, which is interesting because if advertising is going to be the way of doing business, advertising quality needs to improve. And so the production of advertising may be even more creative and more interesting and perhaps an area of growth we may want to look at. But generally speaking, I think the question in my mind, and perhaps an exciting area of growth, could be AVOD, or ad-based video on demand, as we look at 2024.
And as that proceeds, on some level, we are returning to the consumer experience that they have today, that we all have today in linear television, advertising-supported content. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, the only difference is you're looking at this on an on-demand basis as opposed to having a program that is said by somebody else. I think that's essentially the only difference.
Yeah, interesting how these decisions and tactics ebb and flow within the same kind of undulating lake of experiences that management wants to try out in order to retain subscribers, because they're vulnerable. The whole key of streaming, in addition, is that subscribers leave and they don't come back, or they come back specifically for a chosen episode or a chosen movie. It's a very tough model to achieve ongoing success.
Yes, for sure.
So there's another area that I wanted to cover that has to do with streaming at Apple, right? Apple TV Plus, and their theatrical model. It's worth highlighting. They're releasing to theaters through 3 different studios. Paramount for Flower Moon, which opened middle of October. 45 days later is expected to be beginning of the year on the streaming service, Apple TV Plus. Sony, which released Napoleon in theaters, released on November 22nd. Again, January will be on Apple TV Plus. And Universal opening Argyle in February in theaters first. This is the first time that Apple has been premiering their movies in theaters in a 45-day window, and then on Apple TV Plus. It's a bow to exhibition, which is terribly important and wise, in my opinion. On the other hand, Netflix continues to release their original movies in theaters for only a few weeks before their streaming release.
Yeah, I think that I was just going to add to that point that there is an appreciation for the theatrical experience, which I think is being noticed by the streaming services. You may argue that Netflix could have made a lot more money had they kept some of the releases in the theater a little bit longer. And I think that's really where I think there's a recognition of the strength of that theatrical window.
Yes, and especially, that's totally correct. Anyway, let's move on and cover other media. So, as we discussed earlier, linear TV and cable losing market share. Would you like to expand on that a little more?
It's interesting, is I look at it a little bit differently. The losing market share is evident. I mean, you can see that there's less and less subscribers to cable, and perhaps there's also a move away from the networks themselves, right? There's a variety of what we call linear television programming, whether it's cable, whether it's traditional networks. Nevertheless, we have to recognize a couple of very important points. It is highly profitable for the studios and networks to continue that relationship with the cable networks. It is not only highly profitable, it is much more predictable, and it's relatively consistent. And even if you look at today's financials of the larger studios that also own their own cable channels as well as networks, they are making a significant amount of money, even if it's lower than it was before. Now, I mentioned earlier in our conversation the importance of moving away from exclusive to non-exclusive models in order for you to make a lot more money. And to do that, you can't forget the cable and free television world. And therefore, the question in my mind is, will the cable networks show resiliency as we move into 2024? In my mind, more likely, yes, because they're just one other way that you can get your programs, whether they're films or television shows, whether they are new or whether they're old, you can continue licensing those programs. And it's still attractive and there's still money to be made. So that's why being a profitable area, still being very strong, and the need to license further and further away from your own owned platforms or even networks, I still see this area thriving.
Very good. And what's interesting is that your research and knowledge in this particular subject is sometimes contrary to some journalists who seem to think that these numbers are really failing as to make them so serious, that management is very concerned about this core and traditional part of their bottom line. So thank you for presenting that useful information. I have a couple of beats that are unrelated, but it does involve other media. In September, the luxury brand holding company Artemis bought CAA, the biggest talent agency, right? ICM and CAA merged a few years ago, valuing CAA at $7 billion. Artemis owns many luxury brands and Christie's auction house and is headed by billionaire Francois-Henri Pinault, who happens to be married to Salma Hayek. So that's a real change, a sea change in the history of CAA, and good for them. We hope that it resulted in many of the partners sort of cashing out. Next, in August, Penn Entertainment, owner of casinos, hotels, and online gambling sites, announced that they were going to pay, and this is all about ESPN, but we haven't touched upon Disney ESPN. They'll pay ESPN $1.5 billion with a B over 10 years with sportsbook ESPN Bet replacing Barstool Sports. So this is going to replace Barstool Sports. Technically, this is Disney's first foray into gambling, which also begs the question, what is in ESPN's future in connection with Disney? My sense is that they're not going to sell it because it's valuable, but in my opinion, they will take on more financial partners to ease the burden. What do you think?
No, yeah, it's just another form of sustainability and cash flow management into the future, since money is needed to probably invest in the future way of distributing and other areas. But again, I think it brings back to the point that even if you look at ESPN specifically, it is still a fairly profitable network, and people still go to their cable service in order for them to watch live football games, basketball games, baseball games, and many more. And I think that you mentioned sports, but I think sports in particular is still very strong and highly valued and important. And so I think that while there may be partners coming in, it still doesn't change the underlying financials because, again, cable and free is still profitable and sustainable. And I think you're right, it's eroding over time, but it is something that you can't ignore. And I think that investors are coming in and looking at that as well as an area that there is liquidity and future ultimates that make them attractive still.
Very good. Well said, and thank you. So a couple more beats before we close. And this has to do with Sony and PlayStation, right? Sony released PlayStation VR2 with a headset and goggles at an eye-popping price of $550 each. And you add to that a high-end PlayStation 5 at a total cost with headset is over $1,000, a very high-end purchase, taking it out of the reach of so many potential customers. But that's their decision, and I thought that was worth mentioning.
It is an exciting area, and I think that the cost will go down over time. But I think that the VR, generally, I think the video game experience is going to be an incredible experience in the future. But again, it's still a little bit too expensive. So I think that there will be a cost adjustment over time.
Very good. We have something to look forward to. And finally, we look forward in 2024 to more labor management confrontations, because the contracts are expiring for both IATSE, International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, all the below-the-line employees in production, and also the Teamsters. So another year of labor unrest. Who knows? Labor will be emboldened by the strength shown by the Writers Guild and SAG-AFTRA in 2023.
Hopefully for not long, and hopefully that we will not have that long disruption we had in 23.
Yes, we hope that both labor and management see the light and the need for a swift and satisfying conclusion. And I hope we can feel a swift and satisfying conclusion to this episode of Crystal Ball, a look at 2024 on the Movie Business Podcast. So it was so much fun to be with you again. It is the return of ILAN HAIMOFF. Thank you, ILAN, for being with me and sharing your expertise on the Movie Business Podcast. Thank you.
Always a pleasure. I had really fun doing this with you. Thank you.